The temple bell had not yet struck its first chime when the scream shattered the silence. A young boy, no more than 10, stood barefoot in the snow, watching an old man collapse at the wooden gate. Steam rose from the man's mouth as blood pooled beneath his trembling fingers. "I'm dead." In his fist, clutched like a dying secret, was a torn parchment sealed in red wax. The child didn't scream. He didn't cry. He knelt beside the elder, placing a hand on his chest as if trying to press the soul back in. "Ji-sama," he whispered. The old man looked up, eyes cloudy with stories never told, and said, "Tell her, I chose shame to protect her name." Then he was gone. The snow kept falling. Inside the house no one stirred. The boy stared at the gate for a long time, as if expecting someone else to follow. No one came. The letter would stay unopened for 17 years, buried beneath floorboards sealed with silence. By the time it was read, 3 generations would have already paid its price. 17 winters passed, and with them, the boy became a man of silence. His name was Renji. He never asked about the letter, though he felt it breathing beneath his feet every night. No one spoke of that morning. His mother, Sachiko, never looked him in the eye again after the elder's death. Her eyes always searched the floor, as if she too had buried something. In the village, they whispered behind closed doors. That boy was never meant to inherit. The grandfather died protecting a lie. Renji heard it all. He carried it like armor and poison both. He became a blacksmith, not by choice, but necessity. Metal was honest. Fire told no lies. But every time he struck iron, he saw the blood. He saw the seal. He wondered whose name was written inside. The village elder approached the forge one evening, wrapped in ceremonial robes, eyes cloudy from time and truth. He stood without speaking until Renji finally looked up. "You know," the elder said, "that letter was meant for your mother." But he never had the courage. Renji didn't flinch. "Why are you telling me this now?" The elder sighed. "Because your hands are already covered in the consequences." The next day, Renji found his mother burning old scrolls. When he asked her what they were, she said, "The past, and some pasts deserve to stay ash." She never mentioned a letter. But that night, Renji unearthed the floorboard. He didn't open it. Not yet. He just stared at the seal and thought, what if I never open it? Would that mean the shame dies with him? But silence doesn't bury truth. It only delays the reckoning. He took the letter to the shrine, not to open it, but to leave it in the hands of the gods. The old priest watched him from a distance. "The dead don't need forgiveness," the priest said. "Only the living do." Renji asked, "And what if the truth breaks everything left standing?" The priest didn't answer. Instead, he offered incense. The scent wrapped around Renji like an old memory. His grandfather's hands, always scented with cedar and fire. He placed the letter on the altar and bowed. But even as he left, he felt the weight hadn't lifted. It had only shifted into his chest, into his breath. The truth had changed hands, but not hearts. That night, Renji dreamt of fire, not flames that burned, but ones that whispered. In the dream, his grandfather sat by the forge, hands blackened but calm. "I didn't run," the old man said. "I bowed. I begged, and I gave them everything, even my name." Renji shouted in the dream, "Why didn't you tell me?" The old man's reply came not as words, but as silence, and then a bell. The same bell that tolled the day he died. Renji woke before dawn, soaked in sweat. The letter still lay unopened, but now it pulsed like a wound. He knew then, shame wasn't what destroyed men. Silence was. Renji walked the village roads like a ghost, his body present, but his mind always at the shrine. Children whispered when he passed. Mothers tugged them closer. It wasn't hate. It was fear, fear of what his blood carried. At the local dojo, no one asked him to spar. The master once told him, even a fine blade can carry a crack no one sees. Renji sharpened others' swords but never held one himself. In private, he began to study old texts. Not the kind that taught combat, but those that spoke of bushidō, of silence as strength, shame as service. One passage burned into his mind. The man who carries disgrace with dignity is the one who makes it sacred. And for the first time Renji wondered, had his grandfather lived by a code none of them understood? If so, then perhaps shame wasn't the end of legacy. Maybe it was the beginning of a deeper kind. One evening, Renji visited the dojo after hours. The hall was empty except for the master, an aging swordsman with eyes like still water. Without words, Renji bowed deeply. The master remained seated. "Why now?" he asked. Renji replied, "I want to know what it means to wield something you fear." The master stood slowly. "Then you must learn what it means to be cut." That night they didn't train in technique, they meditated in silence. The master lit incense and placed a wooden bakken before Renji Daitano. "This is not for battle," he said. "It's to remind you how much war begins within." As the incense curled toward the ceiling, Renji felt something stir, not confidence, but clarity. He didn't want to fight. He wanted to understand what his family had buried. The next morning, Renji confronted his mother. She was kneeling by the family altar, lighting sticks of incense for ancestors she never spoke of. "Tell me," he said, voice firm but trembling, "what did he protect you from?" She didn't look at him. "Not what? Who?" Renji waited. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the incense. "Your father," she whispered. "He wasn't the man you believed. And your grandfather took the shame to shield us both." Renji's breath caught. The man whose name he bore was never in any story. Now he knew why. And where is he now? She finally looked up. Her eyes, red with history, said more than her words. Gone. But not far enough. The truth began to splinter everything he thought he understood. That night, Renji sat alone outside the house, staring at the sky. He didn't cry. The stars were too old for tears. He thought of his grandfather's hands. Strong. Silent. Burning with unspoken weight. "I was lied to," he muttered. But another voice inside asked, "Or were you protected?" The line blurred. Honor and silence, truth and burden. Where did one end and the other begin? The cold wind stung his face. In that moment, he realized that carrying shame wasn't cowardice. Sometimes it was courage wrapped in quiet. A sword without a sheath. He whispered, "Ji-sama, what did you want me to become?" But the stars didn't answer. Only the wind did, soft, relentless, like regret brushing against skin. Renji returned to the shrine. This time not with a letter, but with questions. The priest greeted him quietly. "Have you opened it?" Renji shook his head. "I need to know what I was protected from, before I learn what I must protect." The priest smiled faintly. "Then you're ready, not to read, but to remember." He led Renji to the back of the shrine, where names were etched into stone tablets. There, beneath layers of moss, was a name Renji didn't recognize, but the surname was his. "He served, then disappeared, and reappeared with your mother." The priest placed a hand on Renji's shoulder. "Sometimes legacy isn't written in ink, it's burned into silence." Renji ran his fingers over the name, and for the first time, felt both fear and pride in equal measure. The forge burned hotter than usual. Renji's hands trembled as he shaped the steel. But it wasn't the heat. It was what he'd learned. His grandfather hadn't just shielded them. He had defied the clan's code, choosing love over obedience. And for that, they erased him. The blade he worked on now wasn't for sale. It was personal. A wakizashi. Shorter than the katana, traditionally used for honor-suicide. But Renji wasn't building it to die. He was building it to remember. He etched a name onto its spine, the name from the stone. The weight of it settled into the metal, as if the soul of the silenced man entered it. As sparks flew, Renji whispered, "You carried the shame. I'll carry the truth." That night, he did not sleep. He watched the steel cool beside the flame, knowing it was the beginning of something irreversible. Word spread. The blacksmith who had never held a blade was forging one with a name long erased. An elder from the clan council visited, face taut with displeasure. "You dishonor the quiet he died for," the man growled. Renji stood firm. "Or, I give it meaning." The elder stepped closer. "There's no honor in reopening graves." Renji held his gaze. "Then, why are you here?" The elder left without answering. That night Renji found a warning scrawled on his forge wall: "Bury what he buried." His mother wouldn't speak to him. She simply closed her door, and this time locked it. But Renji understood, truth is always loudest just before someone tries to silence it. He now knew. The path of honor was not paved by obedience, but by remembrance. He went to the river that ran beneath the village cliffs, a place his grandfather used to take him as a child. It had always been their secret. He knelt by the water and unsheathed the wakizashi. It shimmered under the moonlight, cold and questioning. "What if I'm wrong?" he whispered. The wind answered with rustling bamboo. In the reflection, Renji saw not just himself, but his grandfather's face over his shoulder. A memory, maybe, or something more. "You weren't weak," Renji said. "They were afraid of what you remembered." He placed the blade gently in the water, letting the current cool its soul. A sudden gust sent ripples across the surface. And just like that, the reflection was gone. But something had shifted in him. He no longer feared the truth. He feared silence. Renji returned to the village center with the blade sheathed at his side. It was the first time in years anyone had seen him wear a sword. Whispers rose. Children stopped playing. A woman crossed herself silently. He walked to the clan's ancestral hall and bowed before its gate. "If you won't speak his name, I will." The council refused him entry. A guard moved to block him. Renji didn't flinch. "I come not for revenge, but restoration." The guard paused. Something in Renji's eyes, resolve sharpened by loss, held him still. He turned and stepped aside. Inside, the council waited. "You will speak, and we will listen," the eldest said. Renji bowed again, this time not out of submission, but sacred defiance. Inside the hall, Renji laid the wakizashi on the floor before the elders. "This blade carries his name, not to shame him, but to honor what shame was forced to carry." A murmur passed through the room. One elder leaned forward. "You want us to rewrite what's been buried?" Renji's voice was steady. "No, I want you to remember it." Silence filled the space like smoke. Finally, the oldest among them, a woman with eyes that had seen 3 wars, stood. "Let the boy speak." And Renji did. Of silence, of sacrifice, of a man erased to preserve a lie. He ended with only this: "You called it dishonor. He called it love." When he left the hall, the blade remained behind, resting not as a weapon, but as a relic of what was once unspoken. 2 days passed. Then, a knock at Renji's door. An old courier in faded robes held out a scroll, wax sealed in the mark of the clan, emblem Renji hadn't seen since childhood. "They never issued this," the courier said, voice gravelly. "It was meant to be destroyed." Renji took it with both hands. Inside was a record, his grandfather's formal resignation from the clan, written in his own hand, dated the night before his collapse. The letter didn't beg forgiveness. It detailed what he had seen, what he had sacrificed, and what he feared they would erase. One line stood alone at the end: "Silence is not loyalty. It is cowardice when truth begs to breathe." Renji stared at the handwriting, trembling. His grandfather hadn't just died. He had testified, and no one had listened. Renji brought the scroll to his mother. She refused to touch it. I knew," she admitted, voice brittle. "But I was afraid. If they erased him, what would they have done to us?" Renji didn't respond. The fire in the hearth crackled louder than her words. "I begged him to walk away quietly," she whispered. "And he did. For me." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. They threatened to expose me, said I was dishonor born. But he took it all, made them forget I ever existed beyond his roof. She looked at her son, really looked at him for the first time in years. You look like him when you're angry. Renji clenched the scroll tighter. Then maybe it's time they remember both of us. That evening, Renji went back to the ancestral hall, alone. He carried the scroll, not hidden, but displayed. The hall was empty, but he knew they would see. He placed the letter beneath the clan's crest, lit a single lantern, and bowed. This isn't for vengeance, he said aloud. It's for remembrance. Then he walked out, leaving the flame to burn beside the truth. That night, the scroll was stolen. No one confessed. The elders denied seeing it. But a child whispered to Renji the next morning, I saw one of them take it. They thought you were asleep. Renji didn't chase. He didn't rage. He returned to the forge and began work on a second blade. This one, nameless. Not to remember, but to protect what memory now threatened. Rumors swirled. The scroll's disappearance became a ghost story. Some said it never existed. Others claimed it would surface if the clan were ever truly threatened. Renji, meanwhile, said nothing. He forged in silence, steel striking steel with rhythmic fury. The second blade took form, sharper, longer, hungrier. It was not ceremonial. It was not poetic. It was a weapon. His mother watched from the doorway one night. What are you making? She asked. Renji replied without looking up, a mirror. She frowned. Blades don't reflect faces. Renji, finally, met her gaze. No, but they reflect the truth when others refuse to see it. The fire hissed. His hands never stopped moving. On the seventh day, the blade was finished. Renji took it to the cliffside river where the first was cool. This time, there was no prayer. Only silence. He placed the sword into the current, watching the water embrace it. A figure appeared behind him, the same clan elder who once warned him. You'll divide this village, he said. Renji replied. Then maybe it was never whole. The elder's voice cracked. We wanted peace. Renji turned. Then you should have protected truth, not silence. The elder looked away. What now? Renji picked up the blade. Now I wait. And if memory comes for me, I'll be ready to meet it. Behind him, the river shimmered like a blade of its own, one forged not from metal, but from generations of unspoken pain. The village awoke to a sound no one had heard in decades, the clang of metal on the ancestral hall's steps. Renji had returned, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood villagers, silent, watching. In his arms, the second blade rested unsheathed. The wind carried the whispers. He's bringing the past to the front door. He walked to the gate and drove the blade into the stone. It rang like thunder. Then he bowed, not to the council, but to the people behind him. This is where truth stands, he said. Not behind scrolls, not buried in whispers, but here, visible. No elder came out. No guards challenged him. The silence was louder than denial. Renji turned to leave. That blade, his reckoning, would remain there, a marker to memory. Not for blood, but for truth. Later that day, a younger council member visited Renji at the forge. You humiliated them, he said. They won't forgive it. Renji replied, I didn't ask for forgiveness. I asked for memory. The young man placed a folded paper on Renji's workbench. It was the missing scroll, burned around the edges but intact. Someone kept it, hid it. Renji stared at it. Why give it back now? The councilman hesitated. Because some of us believe silence has a cost, and we're tired of paying it. Renji took the scroll and set it beside the first blade. Then let this be the beginning, not the end. The man nodded, and for the first time, Renji saw it, not loyalty, but shame turning toward courage. That night, Renji lit a ceremonial fire at the shrine. He placed both blades and the scroll on the altar. His mother stood beside him. "He would have wanted peace," she said. Renji replied, "He earned truth. Peace will come after." One by one villagers came forward, not to pray but to witness. Elders from neighboring villages, silent children, even those who once whispered in fear. They bowed before the flames, not for Renji, but for the man they had buried in silence. The fire rose high. The scroll caught flame last. It burned clean, no smoke, as if it had been waiting for this moment. In its ashes, there was no blame, only light. The next morning, the council elders stood before the villagers for the first time in years. No chairs, no guards, just age and consequence. The oldest among them bowed deeply, not to assert control, but to acknowledge fracture. "We were wrong," she said. "Not in our silence, but in forcing it onto others." Murmurs swept the crowd. Renji stepped forward, not as accuser, but as witness. "This isn't about blame," he said. "It's about not letting it happen again." The elder nodded. "Then let this be the last name we bury in silence." For the first time in generations, the people clapped, not for victory, but for truth rising like dawn. Renji returned to the river, this time alone. No blades. No scrolls. Just a piece of cloth in his hand, his grandfather's sash, faded but whole. He tied it to a bamboo stalk growing by the water's edge. "Joey-sama," he whispered, "your name lives." The wind caught the cloth and lifted it gently, like a breath released after holding too long. Renji closed his eyes. No more questions. No more shame. Just memory, clear, heavy, and finally free. As he walked away, the wind carried one final sound from the river. The soft ring of metal meeting water. There was no blade. Only the echo of what once was, and what had finally been honored. Weeks passed. The forge still burned, but now it sang differently. Villagers came not with fear, but with family blades, old scrolls, faded heirlooms. "Can this be restored?" they would ask. Renji never promised miracles. He offered memory. Each restoration became a ritual, not just of steel, but of truth. Stories poured from mouths long sealed. Dishonored brothers, exiled daughters, forgotten lineages. The village was changing, not through force, but by reflection. One evening, a woman handed Renji a rusted blade. "It was my father's. He never spoke of it." Renji nodded. "Then let it speak now." He touched the steel. It vibrated with the weight of silence, finally lifting. What the blade couldn't cut, time and truth would heal. One morning, the village children gathered outside the forge, watching Renji work. One boy pointed at the sword rack. "Which one is the strongest?" Renji paused. "The one never drawn in anger." The children whispered among themselves. "Was your grandfather strong?" one asked. Renji looked up, hands still stained with soot. "He was the strongest man I never understood, until it was too late." A girl stepped forward. "Will we have to carry shame too?" Renji shook his head gently. "Only if we bury it." The fire behind him hissed, as if in agreement. That day, he set aside a blade just for teaching. Not how to fight, but how to remember, even in silence. Renji's mother began to speak again, not often but with meaning. At the family altar, she lit incense and whispered names previously left unsaid. One evening, she invited Renji to sit beside her. "I used to fear your eyes," she confessed. "Because they held questions I was too tired to answer." Renji said nothing. She placed her hand over his. "But you gave voice to what I silenced." They sat in quiet remembrance, no words between them, just breath and time. For the first time, Renji saw her not as the woman who kept the secret, but the girl who had survived it. And in that understanding, the fracture between them softened into something that almost felt like peace. The ancestral hall doors were opened again, not for ceremony, but for restoration. Renji was asked to carve a new panel beside the clan crest. He didn't hesitate. Into the wood, he etched a simple phrase: "Shame does not rot what is remembered." Below it, he added his grandfather's name. The villagers watched in silence. Some bowed. Others cried. Even the youngest councilman placed his hand on the new panel, whispering, "May no other name go missing." That night, the hall didn't echo with judgment. It pulsed with legacy, messy, painful, but alive. For the first time, the clan's history didn't end in silence. It breathed. Renji returned to the river one final time. No tools. No blades. Just a scroll of his own making. He placed it beneath a rock, wrapped in cloth. "Not to hide," he said aloud, "but to preserve." It held everything: his grandfather's story, the village's awakening, his own reckoning. Not for his children if he had them, but for any soul who needed to remember. The river didn't speak. It didn't need to. In its quiet current, Renji found what no blade could give him: stillness. As he walked away, the wind followed gently, no longer a whisper of regret, but a song of release. The past hadn't been corrected, but it had been honored. And that was enough. Years passed like ripples on the river. The village had changed, not in how it looked, but in how it remembered. Children were taught names once erased. Shrines bore offerings to ancestors both honored and hidden. The forge still rang with fire, but Renji no longer shaped blades for war. He shaped heirlooms, carved hilts, folded steel, symbols of lineage. "Your grandfather's forge," one elder remarked, "has become the village's memory." Renji only nodded. He didn't speak of legacy anymore. He lived it. And each day, as he placed new names into steel, he did not ask whether history was kind. He only made sure it was honest. Because truth, once given form, outlasts the silence that tried to erase it. On the anniversary of his grandfather's death, Renji returned to the shrine alone. He brought nothing: no sword, no incense. Just presence. He knelt not to pray, but to listen. The forest around him swayed in silence. "Jui-sama," he said softly, "your silence was louder than their lies." The wind shifted. A soft rustle stirred the cedar branches. Somewhere nearby, a bamboo stalk creaked. In that moment, Renji didn't need a voice to answer. He felt it, in the stillness, in the hush of a world no longer ashamed. The past had not vanished. It had been folded into the present like steel into flame. And in that union, something sacred had emerged: understanding. A traveler came through the village, young, weary, nameless. She carried a blade wrapped in silk and shame. "They told me you help forgotten names," she said. Renji studied her face, saw the same fear he once wore. "I don't erase history," he replied. "I shape it." She handed him the blade. "It was my mother's. She left it behind." Renji unwrapped it. The steel was chipped, the hilt worn, but it breathed with memory. "Then let's help it speak again," he said. As the forge came to life, the girl sat beside the fire, watching the embers rise. In silence, Renji worked, not just to mend the blade, but to remind her, and himself, that some stories begin where others dared not end. That night, Renji dreamed, not of fire or blades, but of a child running through snow, chasing a shadow that turned to smile. His grandfather stood at the old gate, alive only in memory, but clearer than ever. "You carried it well," he said. "You made it right." Renji reached out, but the image blurred. The snow stopped falling. And in that dream there was no pain, only peace, earned and quiet. When he woke, the forge was still warm, though he hadn't lit it. He looked toward the door and saw the cloth from the river, folded on his step. He smiled. Some legacies didn't fade. They found their way back, one whisper at a time. They say the sword is silent until drawn. But the wiser ones know it speaks even in its rest. In that village, long forgotten by most maps, children still ask, "Who was the man who made truth visible?" And elders simply say, "He listened when silence broke hearts." Renji's forge remains, not as a place of weapons, but of memory. And above its entrance hangs a wooden plaque with no name, just one carved line. Sometimes the only way to honor silence is to give it a voice. The wind still carries whispers. The river still hides scrolls. And the blades, no longer drawn, still gleam in reverence. The code wasn't lost. It was never written, just lived.